Hey guys, Melissa here again with another video for you. This time I am working on this still life of some cherries in soft pastels. I used one of my favorite sanded papers for this one, and that is Fisher 400 sanded paper. Very similar to UArt 400 if you're not able to find it anywhere. They're pretty much the same paper in my mind. I used various soft pastels for this, just some of my usual favorite brands. Richeson, Unison, Terry Ludwig are probably some of the ones I used in this one. And for hard pastels, I used Prismacolor New Pastels. So I start out by just getting in my underpainting. So there's not much of a rhyme or reason to exactly what colors I'm choosing for the underpainting. Most of this is going to get covered up anyways. But for the cherries themselves, I'm trying to use colors that I think will go well with the reds of the cherries on top. So purples, magentas, oranges are basically what I'm using. And for the surface that the cherries are sitting on, I wanted that area to be a little warmer. I want it to have like some brightness coming through it, so that's why I chose the pink and the orange for that. And I chose some cooler colors on the top to contrast with that. So what I'm doing with the paintbrush is wetting it down with some isopropyl alcohol. This is just your regular, rubbing alcohol, 70% that you can find in the drugstore, grocery store. And I'm using a Simply Simmons synthetic brush to wet that down. Really, you can use whatever you have on hand, though I wouldn't use any expensive or like really soft brushes on the sanded paper because they will eventually chew up the bristles on that. So for the cherries, I've actually switched to a smaller bristle brush, and that is just one of the cheapies that come in that. It's like a pack of 12 or something from Michael's or Hobby Lobby that are just for a couple bucks for all the 12 of them. And those are more of my disposable brushes. So after that's dry, I will start in the initial layers of my soft pastel painting. For the top here, I'm just using dark blues, dark reds, basically just colorful darks that I have. I'm not using black because that ends up looking a little dull. And I'm just layering until it looks the way that I want it to. At this point, I'm not exactly sure how dark I want to go with it or how colorful I want to go with it, so this is a good base layer to stop at. And now we're getting started on the cherries themselves. I have probably 5 or 6 different reds and purples that I'm using for this area. I believe they're mostly Terry Ludwigs, though I do start out with a couple unisons for these. Really, whatever you have on hand is what you can use. The exact brand isn't important, the color isn't important. As long as you get a variety of darks and lights and a variety of shades of color. So in this case, different reds, reddish oranges, purples are going to end up working well for cherries. I blend a little bit out with one of those tiny paper stumps just because I couldn't quite get my finger into those tiny little crevices of the cherries. But that ends up actually knocking off a bit of pastel at the same time, which if you want to layer more pastel on top, that ends up working out well. And that really dark purple you see me using is one of my new favorite colors. That is a Great American Pastel. It is called Plum, and it's their darkest one of that line. They have, I think, 4 or 5 different shades of that color, but that is the darkest one, and it is darker even than that Terry Ludwig eggplant color that I love so much. It's just a really nice dark color for, I use it pretty much for everything at this point. So basically what I'm doing with the cherries is just layering, layering, and more layering. So as I blend out with my finger, or in some areas I don't blend, it ends up changing the contours of the cherries a bit. So I come back on top with a couple other different colors to give it a little more shape, and in some cases to give it a little more pop of color. And you'll see me just work them over and over and over again with these same colors. And I just keep working it until it looks the way that I want it to. I am following the reference fairly closely as far as the light and shadows go, not necessarily the colors, and definitely not the background. This photo I took with, I don't know, it was just some cherries that I bought at the store just because I wanted to take pictures of them. And I set it up on my kitchen counter, with all like the flowers and the sugars and everything in the background, and it really wouldn't have made a good photorealistic artwork. But the idea is that I just wanted to get the setup of the cherries and the lighting correct. So that's what I'm looking at. And every time you see me picking up that board a little bit, that is me knocking the extra pastel off of my paper without blowing it off. Because as I always say, you don't want to breathe in that pastel dust. Alright, so this continues much more in the same fashion as it has. I'm pretty much layering the same colors that I've been using for the cherries that are in the little dish there. So I will put on a little music for you and I'll come back when I need to add some more commentary. Alright, so now I'm starting in with the stems of the cherries. I'm using my Prismacolor New Pastels to block those in. I've pulled out various light greens, dark greens for the stems, and I'm using a pretty good amount of pressure since these are hard pastels. It's a little more difficult to layer them over soft pastels since the tooth of the paper is fairly full at this point. I'm trying to keep them pretty loose. I'm not paying attention to exactly how they look in my reference photo. I'm just trying to get the general shape, the lights and the darks, and that big part on the end of the stem. I'm not sure what it's called, just to make it look a little more realistic. And I'm smudging them a little bit out with my fingers just to make them fade into the background. So moving on to the dish, I'm using various grays and black new pastel to block in the different areas of the dish. To get that nice sheen on the dish itself, I will use just a new pastel in light gray on its side and kind of gently rake that over the top of the cherries. I don't want to completely cover up what's underneath because then it's going to look a lot more opaque than the dish actually is. I want it to look like it's a see-through dish. And then in the finished piece, you'll see I've added in like some light blues and light oranges to that dish as well, though that isn't shown in the video here. And that was just because I thought it looked a little flat on its own. And now adding the bright spots on the cherries. These are the reflections of the light. I am hyping them up a little bit from my reference photo since the cherries were honestly not that shiny, but I wanted them to be in my painting. I'm just using a bright light pink new pastel with a good amount of pressure to block that in. And here is the finished artwork. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And please remember to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you next time.